Lysandra's story. Chapter 1. The fire had long since died when Lysandra woke to the sound of her own whimpering. Cold seeped through the thin blanket she had stolen from the healer's refuse pile 3 winters ago, the fabric so worn now that moonlight penetrated its weave like accusatory fingers. Her body ached in places she had learned not to name, the phantom pains that visited her each month when the moon swelled full and heavy in the sky. Around her, the walls of the abandoned grain house creaked with wind that knifed through gaps in the timber, carrying with it the scent of pine resin and the distant smoke of hearth fires she would never be welcomed near. She was 22 years old, and she had been dead to her pack for nearly 4 years. The Frostclaw pack did not tolerate weakness. From the time Lysandra could walk, she had understood this fundamental truth as clearly as she understood hunger and cold. The pack was power incarnate, a werewolf kingdom carved into the frozen northern mountains, where only the strong survived the brutal winters and the even more brutal hierarchy that governed every breath, every word, every drop of blood spilled in dominance or submission. Her father had been a mid-ranking warrior, her mother a seamstress of modest skill. They had given her life, and then they had given her nothing else that mattered. When Lysandra was 7, her mother died birthing a son who never drew breath. Her father, already distant, became a shadow that passed through their small cottage only to eat and sleep, his eyes sliding over Lysandra as though she were furniture, or worse, a reminder of failure. She learned to make herself small, to move quietly, to exist in the spaces between his notice. It was a skill that would serve her later, though she did not know it then. At 13, she presented as Omega during the spring gathering, and the trajectory of her life crystallized into something inevitable and cruel. Omegas were rare in the Frostclaw pack, perhaps one born in every 50 wolves, and they were treated with a reverence that bordered on worship or a contempt that tasted like ash, depending on their fertility and beauty. Lysandra had neither advantage. She was small-boned and plain-featured, her hair a dull brown that refused to shine even when clean, her eyes too large for her face in a way that made her look perpetually startled or afraid. But it was the ritual that sealed her fate. The coming-of-age ceremony for Omegas was held in the temple at the heart of Frostclaw's capital, a structure of black stone and silver veins that thrust upward from the mountain like a talon. The high priestess, an ancient beta named Morwenna who smelled of bitter herbs and old blood, presided over the rite with a solemnity that made Lysandra's skin crawl. She was stripped naked before the gathered pack elders and made to stand in a circle of salt and wolfsbane while Morwenna chanted in the old tongue, words that scraped against Lysandra's ears like claws on stone. Then came the test. A silver blade, moon-blessed and ancient, was pressed to Lysandra's lower abdomen just above her womb. The priestess murmured an invocation, and the blade should have glowed warm and golden if Lysandra's Omega biology was sound, if her body could bear the young that alphas prized above all else. Instead, the blade remained cold and dim, its silver tarnishing to black within seconds. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Morwenna's face, already severe, hardened into something like disgust. Cursed, the priestess declared. Barren, infertile, an Omega whose womb was closed, whose body had rejected the moon's blessing. The words fell on Lysandra like stones, each one bruising deeper than the last. Her father, present in the audience, did not speak in her defense. He did not even meet her eyes. When the ceremony concluded, he left without her, and she understood in that moment that she had become an orphan while both her parents still drew breath. The pack did not exile her immediately. That would have been a mercy Lysandra was not granted. Instead, she was permitted to remain on the edges of Frostclaw society, a ghost tolerated only because outright murder of an Omega, even a broken one, risked the ire of the moon goddess. She was given the meanest work, the tasks no one else would accept. She scrubbed floors in the pack house until her hands bled. She hauled firewood in storms that froze her fingers. She mended torn clothing and tanned hides, her days blurring into a gray exhaustion that became the only constant she knew. Her father died when she was 17, killed in a border skirmish with a rival pack. No one told Lysandra until days after his body had been burned. She felt nothing at the news. a hollowness so complete it frightened her more than grief ever could. She inherited nothing, not even his name, which was scrubbed from pack records as though he had never existed. She was utterly alone. At 18, Lysandra fled the capital, unable to bear the weight of eyes that looked through her, or the whispered insults that followed her like a second shadow. She traveled on foot to the borderlands, a remote region where Frostclaw's territory met the unclaimed wilds, and found work in a village so small it barely warranted a name. The villagers were suspicious of strangers, but they needed a seamstress and someone who could gather medicinal herbs from the dangerous forests that bordered their lands. Lysandra, desperate and skilled in both trades, was accepted with the same cold pragmatism that defined everything in the north. She was useful, and so she was allowed to exist. The village consisted of perhaps 30 families, their homes clustered around a central square where a well-provided water that tasted of iron and stone. The houses were built low to the ground, reinforced against wind and snow, their roofs thick with sod and timber. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray columns that dissipated quickly into the frigid air. To the north, the mountains loomed, their peaks perpetually shrouded in cloud and ice. To the south, the forest began, dense and dark, and full of things that howled in the night. Lysandra rented a corner of the abandoned grain house from the village elder, an irritable beta named Garen who made it clear she was on sufferance. The structure was barely sound, its walls listing slightly to the east, its roof patched with mismatched planks that let in rain and snow with equal enthusiasm. But it was hers, or as close to hers as anything had ever been. She set up a workspace near the single window where light was best, and hung her few possessions on nails driven into the timber. A needle case her mother had left behind, a hunting knife she had stolen from her father's belongings, a cloak so threadbare it was more holes than fabric. She worked from dawn until long after dark, sewing clothing for villagers who paid her in bread, salted meat, or copper coins, so old they were nearly smooth. She also ventured into the forest to gather herbs, feverfew, yarrow, silver moon root, that she sold to the village healer, an Omega woman named Isla, who was the only person in the settlement who did not treat Lysandra with open disdain. Isla was old, her hair white as fresh snow, and she walked with a cane carved from blackthorn. She never asked Lysandra about her past, and for that, Lysandra was grateful beyond words. The forest was dangerous, everyone said so. Wolves, wild ones, not the shifter kind, prowled its depths, along with bears, lynxes, and stranger things that had no names in the common tongue. But Lysandra was careful, and she had learned to read the forest's moods, to sense when it was safe to venture deeper and when it was wiser to turn back. She carried her knife always, and she moved quietly, disturbing nothing, taking only what she needed. The forest, in its own way, tolerated her presence. She came to see it as a kind of sanctuary, the only place where she did not feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. But even sanctuary had its limits. The pain began when Lysandra was 19, a deep, wrenching ache that started low in her belly and spread outward like cracks in ice. It came in waves, unpredictable and agonizing, leaving her gasping and drenched in sweat. She told no one, fearing the villagers would see it as proof of her curse, or worse, as a sign she carried disease. She endured in silence, biting down on strips of leather to keep from screaming, and when the pain passed, she rose and returned to her work as though nothing had happened. The dreams started soon after, vivid, overwhelming visions that came to her in sleep, and sometimes even in waking moments, pulling her mind away from her body and into places she had never seen. She dreamed of a palace carved from black stone, its towers scraping the sky, its halls lit by torches that burned with green flame. She dreamed of a throne room where a figure sat in shadow, his face obscured, but his presence so powerful it made her chest tighten even in sleep. She dreamed of wolves with eyes like molten gold, of a forest that sang with voices she almost understood, of a moon so large it seemed to swallow the sky. The dreams disturbed her more than the pain. She did not understand them, and she feared what they might mean. Omegas were said to have prophetic gifts, the ability to sense things beyond the reach of ordinary perception. But Lysandra had been declared broken, her Omega nature stunted and cursed. She should not be having visions. She should not feel this pull, this inexplicable longing toward something she could not name, a direction she could not see but felt in her bones like a compass always pointing north, toward the royal capital, toward Winterfall Keep, toward the heart of the Frostclaw Pack and the Obsidian Palace where the Alpha King ruled. Lysandra had never seen the king. Few had, outside the ranks of the pack elite. Aaron Blackmore was a name spoken with reverence and fear, a figure more myth than man. He had taken the throne young after his father's death in battle, and he had ruled for over a decade with an iron will and a reputation for ruthlessness that kept the northern packs in line. He was said to be powerful beyond measure, his wolf form massive and black as a starless night, his authority absolute. He had taken a mate 5 years ago, a beautiful Omega named Seraphine, who had died in childbirth along with the infant she carried. Since then, the king had remained unmated, and the pack whispered that he had grown colder, more distant, a ruler who led through fear rather than loyalty. Lysandra did not know why she dreamed of him. She had no reason to. She was nothing, a discarded Omega scraping by in a forgotten village, and he was everything, the apex predator who commanded armies and bent the world to his will. The distance between them was so vast it was absurd to even consider. Yet the pull remained, growing stronger with each passing moon, until she began to feel it even when she was awake, a thread of tension that drew her attention northward no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. She told Isla about the dreams once, and only once. The old healer listened in silence, her expression unreadable, and when Lysandra finished, Isla placed a gnarled hand on her shoulder and said only, "The moon has her reasons. Do not fight what is meant to be." Lysandra did not understand what that meant, and Isla refused to explain further. The words haunted her, tangling with her dreams and her pain until she could not separate one from the other. The villagers grew more hostile as time passed. They blamed her for small misfortunes, a cow that sickened, a crop that failed, a child who fell ill with fever. Lysandra was an easy target, a cursed Omega with no family and no allies, and the villagers needed someone to blame for their hardships. Garen, the elder, began to speak of her as a burden the village could not afford. Others muttered that she should be driven out, that her presence offended the moon and brought bad luck to those around her. Lysandra kept her head down and worked harder, hoping her usefulness would outweigh their suspicion. But fear, once seeded, grows quickly in barren soil. It was midwinter when the situation reached its breaking point. A young girl, the daughter of one of the village's few hunters, disappeared while playing near the forest edge. The entire village mobilized to search for her, and Lysandra joined despite the dark looks she received. They found the girl 3 days later, alive but hypothermic, her hands and feet frostbitten. She had wandered into the woods and become lost, disoriented by the cold and the darkness. But when the girl was brought back to the village, fevered and delirious, she babbled about a woman with empty eyes who had led her deeper into the trees, a woman who smelled like death and winter. The villagers turned on Lysandra immediately. They did not need proof. They did not need logic. They needed a villain, and she was already marked. Garen stood in the village square and declared that Lysandra had bewitched the child, that her cursed nature had drawn the girl into danger, that she was a threat to them all. The crowd murmured agreement, their fear coalescing into anger, and Lysandra felt the shift in the air like a storm breaking. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but her voice was drowned out by accusations. Someone threw a stone, and it struck her shoulder, sharp and sudden. She stumbled, and more stones followed, along with fists and kicks. The attack was not coordinated, but it was vicious, driven by a mob mentality that stripped away any pretense of civilization. Lysandra curled in on herself, trying to protect her head, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. She thought distantly that she might die here, beaten to death in the village square by people she had lived among for 4 years. But death did not come. Instead, Garen called a halt, his voice cutting through the chaos. He announced that Lysandra would be punished properly, not as a murderer, since the girl had survived, but as a dangerous witch whose presence endangered them all. She would be sent to the labor camps in the high mountains, where criminals and undesirables were worked to death, mining silver and iron. It was a sentence meant to kill slowly, and everyone knew it. Lysandra was dragged to the village elder's home and shackled, iron cuffs locked around her wrists and ankles. She was thrown into a storage cellar, cold and dark and smelling of rot, and left there while the village debated her fate. She had no allies, no one to speak for her. Isla was too old and too frightened to intervene. Lysandra was alone, as she had always been. She spent 2 days in the cellar, given only stale bread and water. Her body ached from the beating, bruises blooming across her ribs and arms. The shackles rubbed her skin raw, and the cold seeped into her bones until she could not stop shivering. She drifted in and out of consciousness, and in her delirium, she dreamed again. This time, the dream was different, sharper, more real. She stood in a throne room she recognized from her visions, the walls black and gleaming, the air thick with the scent of pine and smoke. A man sat on the throne, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair falling to his collar, his eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked at her, and the weight of his gaze was physical, pressing against her chest like a hand. He rose, moving toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, and when he reached her, he cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You are mine," he said, his voice low and rough. "You have always been mine." Lysandra woke, gasping, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. The dream clung to her, refusing to fade, and she felt the pull northward stronger than ever, a tether wrapped around her soul and dragging her toward something inevitable. On the 3rd day, Garen and 2 other men came for her. They hauled her out of the cellar and tied her to a post in the square, where the entire village had gathered to witness her departure. A wagon waited, its bed filled with other prisoners, a man who had stolen food, a woman accused of adultery, a boy no older than 15 who had deserted his pack duties. They all wore shackles, their faces hollow with despair. Lysandra was forced into the wagon, her body protesting every movement. The driver, a grizzled beta with a scar across his face, cracked his whip, and the horses lurched forward. The village receded behind them, and Lysandra did not look back. There was nothing there worth remembering. The journey to the labor camps took 5 days, each one colder and more brutal than the last. They traveled through mountain passes where the wind screamed like a living thing, through forests so dense that daylight barely penetrated. The prisoners were given minimal food and no shelter, forced to sleep in the wagon or on the frozen ground. 2 of them died before they reached the camps, their bodies left by the roadside without ceremony. Lysandra survived through sheer stubbornness. She refused to give the world the satisfaction of her death, even as her body weakened and her mind frayed. She thought of her mother, long dead. She thought of her father, who had abandoned her. She thought of the villagers who had condemned her. And she thought of the dream, of the man on the throne who had called her his. And she did not understand why that memory gave her strength when nothing else did. On the 5th night, as the wagon climbed into the high peaks where the labor camps were hidden, something shifted. Lysandra felt it first as a prickling along her spine, a sensation like being watched. The other prisoners felt it too. They shifted uneasily, their eyes darting to the shadows that pressed close around the narrow road. The driver cursed and urged the horses faster, but the animals balked, their ears flat against their skulls. Then the attack came. Wolves, not wild, but shifters, burst from the tree line with savage precision. They were rogues, packless and feral, their eyes gleaming with hunger and madness. They fell on the driver first, tearing him from his seat before he could even scream. The horses panicked, rearing and kicking, and the wagon tilted dangerously. Lysandra threw herself to the floor, her shackles clanging, as the other prisoners screamed and fought to free themselves. The rogues tore through the prisoners with brutal efficiency. Blood sprayed across the snow, dark and steaming. Lysandra pressed herself into the corner of the wagon, making herself as small as possible, her heart hammering in her chest. She was going to die here, torn apart by rogues in the middle of nowhere, and no one would ever know. But then, impossibly, the air changed. Power flooded the clearing, so immense and overwhelming that Lysandra's breath caught in her throat. The rogues froze mid-attack, their heads swiveling toward the tree line, and then he emerged. The wolf was massive, easily twice the size of the rogues, his fur black as midnight and gleaming with an almost metallic sheen. His eyes burned gold, ancient and merciless, and the sheer presence of him was enough to make the rogues cower. He moved with terrifying speed, his jaws closing around the throat of the nearest rogue and ripping it out in a single, efficient motion. The others scattered, but they were not fast enough. He hunted them down one by one, his movements a blur of black fur and crimson spray, until the clearing was silent save for the ragged breathing of the surviving prisoners and the soft crunch of snow under paws. The black wolf turned toward the wagon, and Lysandra's entire body locked with instinctive terror. She could not move, could not breathe, could not do anything but stare as he approached. His eyes found hers, and in that instant, the world tilted. The bond snapped into place with a violence that drove the air from her lungs. It was fire and ice, agony and ecstasy, a connection so profound that she felt it in every cell of her body. The wolf's eyes widened, shock flickering across his inhuman features, and Lysandra understood with a clarity that transcended thought. Mate, this was the Alpha King, and he was hers. Lysandra's story. Chapter 2. The wolf shifted before her eyes, bones cracking and reforming with sounds that should have made her flinch but somehow did not. Magic rippled through the air, visible as threads of silver light that danced across his fur as it receded into bronze skin. Within seconds, a man stood where the massive beast had been, naked and utterly unconcerned by his nudity, his body a study in lethal grace and brutal power. He was tall, his shoulders broad enough to block out the moonlight that filtered through the trees behind him. Dark hair fell past his collar, wild and tangled from the shift, and his face was carved from harsh angles, a strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth set in a line that spoke of command and cruelty in equal measure. But it was his eyes that held her captive. Those storm-gray eyes that had burned gold in his wolf form. Eyes that now stared at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Lysandra could not move. The shackles around her wrists and ankles suddenly felt heavier than iron. Chains that bound her not just physically, but to this moment, to this impossible reality. The mate bond thrummed between them like a living thing, a golden thread she could almost see if she looked at him from the corner of her eye. It pulled at something deep inside her chest, something she had not known existed until this moment, and the sensation was so overwhelming she thought she might shatter from it. The Alpha King, because that was who he had to be. No other wolf possessed that kind of power, that suffocating presence, did not speak immediately. He studied her with the focus of a predator assessing prey, his gaze traveling from her tangled hair down to her shackled wrists, lingering on the bruises that mottled her arms, and the torn fabric of her dress where the villagers had struck her. Something flickered across his face, an emotion too quick to name, and then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask she suspected he wore as naturally as breathing. Behind him, other wolves emerged from the forest. They were smaller than the king, but still imposing, their bodies shifting from wolf to human with practiced ease. Warriors, Lysandra realized. Elite guards who traveled with their king, protectors who would die for him without hesitation. There were 6 of them, all male, all radiating the kind of confidence that came from years of training and bloodshed. They wore leather and fur, weapons strapped to their backs and hips, and they regarded the carnage in the clearing with the detached professionalism of soldiers who had seen worse. One of them, a man with silver hair tied back in a warrior's knot and eyes the color of ice, approached the king and bowed his head slightly in deference. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rough but respectful. "The rogues are dealt with. Should we check for survivors?" The king did not look away from Lysandra. "Do so," he said, his voice deep and resonant, the kind of voice that commanded obedience without effort. "And find something to cover me. We have witnesses." The silver-haired warrior's gaze flicked to Lysandra, and something in his expression sharpened with recognition or perhaps suspicion. But he said nothing, merely nodded and gestured to the others. They moved through the clearing with military precision, checking bodies, securing the area. One of them returned with a heavy cloak, which he offered to the king with another bow. Aaron, because Lysandra somehow knew that was his name, the bond whispering it to her like a secret, took the cloak and fastened it around his shoulders without breaking eye contact with her. "You," he said, and the single word felt like a command and a question wrapped into one. "Come here." Lysandra's body responded before her mind could catch up, a compulsion born not from fear, but from the bond itself, which urged her toward him with a force that bordered on pain. She stumbled forward, her shackles clanking, and nearly fell before she caught herself against the side of the wagon. The movement sent a jolt of agony through her ribs where the villagers had kicked her, and she gasped, biting down on her lip to keep from crying out. The king closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, moving faster than she could track. Suddenly he was there, towering over her, and the heat of his body radiated against her skin even through the cold night air. He reached out, and Lysandra flinched instinctively, expecting violence because that was all she had ever known from those stronger than her. But his hand, when it touched her chin, was surprisingly gentle. He tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his gaze, and she saw something flicker in those gray depths. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. "Omega," he murmured, and the word was weighted with meaning she did not fully understand. His nostrils flared as he scented her, and his expression shifted into something darker, more complex. Injured, starved. His thumb brushed across her split lip, and she winced. "Who did this to you?" Lysandra could not find her voice. Her throat felt tight, her tongue thick and useless. She had not expected gentleness from the Alpha King, had not expected him to care about her injuries. She was nothing, less than nothing, a cursed Omega who had been thrown away by everyone who should have protected her. Why would he be any different? "Answer me." His voice dropped lower, edged with something that might have been anger but was not directed at her. "Who hurt you?" "The village," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was accused. They sent me to the labor camps." His eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the clearing seemed to drop several degrees. "For what crime?" "Witchcraft." The word tasted like ash. "A child wandered into the forest and they blamed me. I did nothing, but they did not care." The king stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he released her chin and stepped back, creating distance that felt like a physical loss. The bond stretched between them, protesting the separation, and Lysandra had to clench her fists to keep from reaching for him. She did not understand what was happening to her body, to her instincts. She had never felt anything like this, never wanted to be close to anyone, and now every cell in her being was screaming at her to close the gap, to touch him, to claim what the bond insisted was hers. "Kale," the king said, and the silver-haired warrior appeared at his side immediately. "Have these shackles removed, and bring her something warm to wear." Kale's expression remained neutral, but Lysandra saw the way his eyes narrowed fractionally, the way he glanced between her and the king as though trying to solve a puzzle. "Your Majesty, should we not question her first? She was being transported to the camps for a reason. Did I ask for your opinion?" The king's voice did not rise, but the air around him seemed to vibrate with barely contained power. "Remove the shackles. Now." Kale bowed his head quickly, the gesture of a man who knew not to push his luck. He pulled a set of keys from his belt, likely taken from the dead driver, and approached Lysandra with the careful neutrality of someone dealing with a potentially dangerous situation. He unlocked the shackles around her wrists first, and Lysandra bit back a whimper as blood rushed back into her hands, pins and needles dancing across her skin. The ankle shackles came off next, and she nearly collapsed without their weight to anchor her, her legs trembling with exhaustion and pain. Kale caught her elbow, steadying her, and his touch was impersonal, efficient. "Can you walk?" he asked, his tone neither kind nor cruel. "Yes," Lysandra lied, because she had learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. Another warrior brought a thick wool cloak, which Kale draped over her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming, and Lysandra pulled it tight around herself, suddenly aware of how badly she was shaking. The other prisoners in the wagon had gone silent, their eyes wide with fear and confusion as they watched the Alpha King stand in their midst. 2 of them were dead, killed by the rogues, their bodies sprawled in pools of blood that steamed in the frigid air. The 3 survivors huddled together, and Lysandra could smell their terror, sharp and acrid. The king turned his attention to them, his gaze sweeping over the wagon's contents with the dispassion of a man accustomed to making life-or-death decisions without hesitation. "What were their crimes?" he asked, directing the question to no one in particular. One of his warriors stepped forward, a younger man with brown hair and a scar across his cheek. "Theft, adultery, and desertion, Your Majesty, according to the transport documents." "Release them," the king said flatly. "They were being sent to die slowly in the mines. That is punishment enough. Send them back to their villages with a warning that if they commit further crimes, they will answer to me personally." The warrior bowed and moved to obey, unlocking the prisoners' shackles with the same efficiency Kale had shown. The prisoners looked stunned, as though they could not believe their sudden reversal of fortune. One of them, the woman accused of adultery, began to weep with relief. They were ushered away from the wagon, given directions back to the road, and told to leave immediately. They did not need to be told twice. Lysandra watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of envy and emptiness. They were free, allowed to return to their lives, while she— what was she? The king had not released her, had not sent her away. He stood near her still, his presence a constant weight at the edge of her awareness, and she did not know what he intended to do with her. "You will come with us," the king said, as though reading her thoughts. He was not looking at her now, but at the forest beyond the clearing, his expression distant. "We are returning to Winterfall Keep. You will be cared for there." Lysandra's breath caught. Winterfall Keep, the obsidian palace at the heart of the Frostclaw Pack, the seat of the Alpha King's power. She had dreamed of it for years, felt its pull like a compass in her chest, but she had never imagined she would actually see it. And now the king was commanding her to go there, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. One did not question the Alpha King. One did not demand explanations from a ruler who could kill with a thought. But Aaron turned to look at her, and his expression was complicated, shadows moving behind his eyes. "Because you are my mate," he said simply, and the words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. "The bond has chosen. We do not defy the moon's will. The moon's will." Lysandra wanted to laugh, a bitter, broken sound that she swallowed down before it could escape. The moon had cursed her, declared her broken and infertile, cast her out to suffer for years. And now the moon's will was binding her to the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, a man who ruled through fear and strength, a man who would expect an heir from a mate who could not give him one. "I am cursed," Lysandra said, the words tumbling out in a rush. The priestess declared it. "My womb is closed. I cannot bear children. I cannot give you what you need." Something flickered across the king's face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. Pain, perhaps, or anger. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, stripped of emotion. "That will be determined later. For now, you are injured and exhausted. You will ride with me, and we will discuss this further when you have recovered." He did not wait for her agreement, simply turned and walked toward the tree line where several horses stood tethered, massive war-bred animals with coats that gleamed in the moonlight. Kale appeared at Lysandra's side again, his hand light on her elbow, guiding her forward. She wanted to resist, to demand more answers, but her body was failing her, exhaustion and pain dragging her down like anchors. She let Kale lead her to the king's horse, a black stallion that stood at least 17 hands high, its eyes intelligent and calm despite the carnage around them. Aaron was already mounted, settling into the saddle with the ease of a man who had spent his life on horseback. He reached down, his hand extended toward Lysandra, and she stared at it for a moment, knowing that if she took it, everything would change. There would be no going back from this moment, no returning to the small, painful life she had carved out for herself in the borderlands. But what choice did she have? The village had cast her out. The labor camps would have killed her. And the bond, that golden thread that bound her to this man, was not something she could simply ignore. It pulled at her with a force that transcended logic or self-preservation, and she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that she would not be able to walk away even if he allowed it. She placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers, strong and warm. He pulled her up with effortless strength, settling her in front of him in the saddle. His arms came around her as he took up the reins, caging her in, and the heat of his body against her back was overwhelming. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, could smell the scent of him, pine and smoke, and something wilder, something that made her wolf stir for the first time in years. "Hold on," he said, his voice close to her ear. And then the horse was moving, surging forward into the night with the rest of the warriors falling into formation around them. They rode through the darkness, the forest a blur of shadows and moonlight. Lysandra clung to the saddle, her body swaying with the horse's gait, and she felt the king's arms tighten around her whenever she threatened to slip. He did not speak, and neither did she. There was too much to say, and no way to say it. So they rode in silence, the bond humming between them like a half-formed song. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Lysandra could not tell. Her sense of time had fractured, everything blurring together into a haze of exhaustion and pain and the overwhelming presence of the man behind her. At some point, she began to drift, her eyes closing despite her efforts to stay alert. She fought against it, knowing that sleep meant vulnerability, but her body would not obey. The warmth of the king's body, the steady rhythm of the horse's movements, the sheer relief of being off her feet and away from immediate danger, it all conspired to drag her down into unconsciousness. The last thing she felt before darkness claimed her was the king's hand shifting to press against her stomach, holding her secure, and his voice, low and rough, murmuring something she could not quite hear. When Lysandra woke, she was no longer on the horse. She was lying on something soft, softer than anything she had felt in years, and warmth surrounded her like an embrace. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, that she had finally died in the cold, and her mind was offering her this kindness as a final gift. But then pain flared in her ribs, sharp and real, and she knew she was alive. She opened her eyes slowly, her vision blurry and unfocused. The ceiling above her was vaulted, constructed from dark wood and stone, with beams that crossed at angles to create a pattern that was both functional and beautiful. Firelight danced across the surfaces, casting shifting shadows, and the air smelled of burning pine and something herbal, lavender perhaps, or chamomile. Lysandra turned her head, taking in her surroundings with growing confusion. She was in a bed, a massive four-poster draped with heavy curtains that had been pulled back to allow firelight in. The mattress beneath her was thick and comfortable, piled high with furs and blankets that cocooned her in warmth. Beside the bed stood a small table holding a pitcher of water, a cup, and a bowl of something that steamed gently. The room itself was large, easily 3 times the size of the entire grain house she had called home, with high windows that showed only darkness beyond. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting scenes of wolves and forests and battles fought under blood-red moons. This was not a guest room. This was a room meant for someone important, someone valued, and Lysandra had no idea why she was here. She tried to sit up, and her body protested immediately, pain shooting through her ribs and back. She gasped, falling back against the pillows, and the sound must have carried because within seconds the door to the room opened and a woman entered. She was middle-aged, her hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a practical braid, her clothing simple but clean. A healer, Lysandra realized, recognizing the leather satchel the woman carried and the way she moved with calm efficiency. "Awake at last," the healer said, her tone neither warm nor cold. "You have been unconscious for nearly a full day." The king was beginning to worry. The king. Lysandra's heart stuttered at the reminder. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. Winterfall Keep, the healer replied, setting her satchel on the table and beginning to unpack various bottles and bandages. The Royal Wing, to be precise. The king insisted you be brought here rather than to the infirmary. The Royal Wing. Lysandra felt dizzy, and it had nothing to do with her injuries. Why? The healer gave her a look that was equal parts exasperation and pity. You truly do not know? Or are you simply being coy? When Lysandra did not answer, the healer sighed. You are the king's mate. The bond was witnessed by his warriors. Word has already spread through the keep like wildfire. By tomorrow, the entire pack will know. Lysandra's stomach twisted. The entire pack. That meant the priestess would know. The elders would know. Everyone who had declared her cursed and worthless would know that the Alpha King had claimed her as his mate, and they would not accept it. They would not allow a broken Omega to stand beside their king. I need to leave, Lysandra said, panic rising in her chest. I cannot stay here. I will bring him nothing but shame. The healer's expression softened fractionally. Child, you are in no condition to go anywhere. Your ribs are bruised, possibly cracked. You are malnourished and dehydrated. And even if you were healthy, where would you go? The bond will not allow you to stray far from the king, not now that it has awakened. You would be in agony within hours, and he would be no better. Lysandra wanted to argue, to insist that she could endure the pain, that she had endured worse. But the truth was, she could already feel the bond tugging at her, a subtle discomfort that whispered of the king's absence. He was not in this room, not close enough to ease the ache, and part of her hated how much that bothered her. Drink this, the healer said, offering her a cup filled with a dark liquid that smelled bitter and medicinal. It will help with the pain and allow you to sleep. You need rest more than anything else right now. Lysandra took the cup with trembling hands and drank, grimacing at the taste. The healer watched her with the patience of someone who had dealt with reluctant patients many times before. And when Lysandra finished, she took the cup back and set it aside. The king will want to see you when you wake again, the healer said, gathering her things. He has been restless. The bond affects him as strongly as it does you, though he hides it better. Lysandra did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The healer left, closing the door softly behind her, and Lysandra was alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. The medicine worked quickly, dragging her down into a heavy, dreamless sleep. When she woke again, it was to the sensation of being watched. Her eyes snapped open, and she found the Alpha King sitting in a chair beside her bed. His posture relaxed, but his gaze intent. He had changed clothes since the forest, now wearing dark leather pants and a tunic of deep charcoal. His hair pulled back from his face in a way that made his features seem even harsher. You are awake, he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been relief. Lysandra pushed herself up slowly, ignoring the protest of her body, until she was sitting upright. The blankets pooled around her waist, and she realized with a start that someone had changed her clothing. She now wore a soft linen shift that was far too fine to belong to her, and her skin had been cleaned of blood and dirt. The thought of someone, perhaps the healer, undressing her while she was unconscious made her feel vulnerable in a way she could not articulate. How do you feel? The king asked. Better, Lysandra said, though that was only partially true. Her body hurt less, but her mind was chaos, a storm of fear and confusion and the ever-present pull of the bond. Thank you for bringing me here, for saving me. He waved a hand dismissively, as though saving her life was a minor inconvenience rather than the monumental act it had been. The rogues would have killed you. I could not allow that. Because of the bond, Lysandra thought. Because the moon had tied them together, and his wolf would not permit harm to come to its mate. Not because he cared about her as a person, but because instinct demanded he protect what was his. We need to talk, Aaron said, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. About what happens next. Lysandra's pulse quickened. I know what you are going to say. You will reject the bond. You have to. I cannot give you heirs. The priestess declared me infertile years ago. The pack will never accept me as your Luna. You need someone strong, someone whole, someone who can stand beside you and secure your bloodline." The king's expression did not change, but something in his eyes darkened. "You assume much." "I assume nothing," Lysandra said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a desperate need to get the rejection over with before she allowed herself to hope. "I know what I am. I know my worth, or lack thereof. You do not need to soften the blow. Just do it. Reject me, and I will leave. I will go far enough that the bond will not torment you." For a long moment, the king said nothing. He studied her with that unnerving intensity, and Lysandra forced herself to hold his gaze, to not look away even though every instinct screamed at her to submit, to lower her eyes before an alpha of his power. "I have ruled for 13 years, Aaron said finally, his voice low and measured. "I have fought wars, crushed rebellions, and made decisions that cost thousands of lives. I have taken a mate before, and I lost her. I know what it is to love and to grieve, and I know what it is to be bound by duty above all else." He paused, and Lysandra felt her chest tighten with anticipation, waiting for the blow. "The pack needs heirs," he continued. "That is not a matter of preference, but of survival. Without a clear line of succession, the Northern Territories will fracture into war the moment I fall in battle or to age. I cannot allow that. I will not allow that." "Then you must reject me," Lysandra whispered, and she hated how much the words hurt to say. "Yes," the king said, and the single word shattered something inside her. "I must." The bond flared between them, sensing the intent, and pain lanced through Lysandra's chest so sharp she could not breathe. Across from her, the king flinched, his hand rising to press against his sternum as though he could physically push the pain away. They stared at each other, both of them caught in the agony of a bond that refused to be denied. And Lysandra understood in that moment just how cruel the moon could be. "I, Aaron Blackmore, Alpha King of the Frostclaw Pack, reject you, Lysandra Vale, as my mate and Luna Queen." The words fell like stones, each one heavier than the last. The bond screamed, thrashing like a wounded animal, and Lysandra felt something tear inside her, something fundamental and irreparable. She cried out, doubling over, and distantly she heard the king make a sound of pain as well, a guttural growl that spoke of agony and rage. But the bond did not break. It should have. Rejection was one of the few things that could sever a mate bond, forcing it to dissolve and freeing both parties to live separate lives. But instead of breaking, the bond held, twisting tighter, digging its claws deeper into both of them. Lysandra gasped, tears streaming down her face, and when she looked up at the king, she saw shock written across his features. "Why?" he rasped, his voice raw. "Why will it not break?" Lysandra did not have an answer. She knew only pain, only the overwhelming wrongness of the rejection and the bond's furious refusal to accept it. And beneath that, buried deep but undeniable, was a single thought that terrified her more than anything else. The bond knew something they did not. Lysandra's story. Chapter 3. The pain lasted for hours. It was not a clean agony, not the sharp, bright hurt of a broken bone or a knife wound. This was something deeper, something that lived in the marrow and the blood, a wrongness that resonated through every cell of Lysandra's body like a discordant note held too long. She lay curled in the massive bed, shaking with the effort of containing screams that wanted to tear free from her throat, and across the room the Alpha King paced like a caged wolf, his face gray with pain and fury. The healer had been summoned, along with 2 others, and they stood in a cluster near the door, speaking in hushed, urgent tones that Lysandra could not quite hear over the roaring in her ears. They kept glancing between her and the king, their expressions troubled, and she knew they were discussing things far above her understanding. Magic, ancient laws, the will of the moon goddess herself. "This should not be possible," one of the healers said, an old man with a long white beard and robes that marked him as a scholar as well as a physician. "A rejection properly spoken should sever the bond. I have seen it done 100 times. The pain is intense but brief, and then both parties are free. Then why has it not severed?" Aaron growled, rounding on the old man with eyes that flashed gold. His wolf was close to the surface. Lysandra could sense it, could feel the barely leashed violence radiating from him like heat from a forge. "Explain this to me, Aldrich. Now." The old healer, Aldrich, spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I cannot, Your Majesty. There are stories, old legends about bonds that refuse to break, but they are rare. So rare that most believe them to be myth rather than truth. A bond that will not accept rejection is said to be ordained by the moon herself, a pairing written in the stars before either party was born. Such bonds are called fated, with a capital F, to distinguish them from ordinary mate bonds. All mate bonds are fated," the king said through gritted teeth. "No, Your Majesty. All mate bonds are fate-touched, influenced by destiny and instinct. But a fated bond is something more. It is absolute, unbreakable. The souls involved are said to be two halves of a single whole, and to separate them would be to destroy both." Aldrich's voice dropped lower, weighted with significance. "It is said that fated bonds produce offspring of extraordinary power, children who can shift before their first year, alphas who can command entire armies with their voice alone, omegas who can heal with a touch." The room fell silent. Lysandra forced herself to breathe, to focus on something other than the pain that was finally beginning to ebb into something more manageable. Fated bond. The words rolled around in her mind like stones, cold and heavy. She had never heard of such a thing, had never been taught that some bonds were more powerful than others. But then she had been denied most formal education after her curse was declared. The pack had seen no point in teaching a broken omega the old ways. "If this is true," the king said slowly, and Lysandra could hear the effort it took him to keep his voice level. "If this bond cannot be severed, then what are my options?" Aldrich exchanged glances with the other healers, and Lysandra saw something like pity in their eyes. "You have two, Your Majesty. You can refuse to complete the bond, keep it incomplete. You and the Omega will both suffer chronic pain, a constant ache that will worsen over time. It will not kill you quickly, but it will weaken you, make you vulnerable. Your enemies will sense it, and they will strike. And the Omega," he trailed off, looking at Lysandra with open sympathy. "She is already weak. She may not survive more than a few months of incomplete bonding. And the second option?" Aaron's voice was flat, emotionless. "You complete the bond. You take her as your true mate, perform the claiming ritual, and accept what the moon has given you." Aldrich paused, then added carefully, "Your Majesty, if this is truly a fated bond, then perhaps the priestess was wrong about the Omega's infertility. Such bonds are not given lightly. The moon would not bind you to a mate who could not fulfill the most basic requirement of a Luna Queen." Lysandra wanted to laugh at that, a bitter sound that would have come out broken and wrong. The priestess wrong? Morwenna, who had served the pack for 40 years, who could read omens in the stars and sense lies in the blood? No, the priestess had not been wrong. Lysandra's body was broken, her womb closed, and no amount of fated bond nonsense would change that fundamental truth. "I need time," the king said finally, and he sounded exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. "Leave us, all of you." The healers bowed and filed out quickly, clearly relieved to escape the suffocating tension in the room. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and then it was just Lysandra and Aaron, bound together by a bond that refused to release them, trapped in a situation neither of them had wanted or asked for. The king walked to the window and stood there, staring out at the darkness beyond. Lysandra could see his reflection in the glass, could see the hard line of his jaw and the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He was angry, she realized. Angry at the moon, at fate, at her for existing and complicating his carefully ordered world. "I did not ask for this," Lysandra said quietly, and she was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I never wanted to be anyone's mate, especially not a king's. I know what I am. I know I am not worthy of you or this place or any of it. If there were a way for me to break this bond myself, to free you, I would do it without hesitation." Aaron turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "You think I blame you for this? Don't you?" Lysandra met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "The moon has chained you to a broken omega, a cursed thing that can give you nothing but pain and shame. Of course you blame me." "I blame the moon," Aaron said, his voice rough. "I blame whatever twisted sense of humor the goddess possesses that would do this to either of us. But I do not blame you, Omega. You are as much a victim in this as I am." The words should have been comforting, but they felt hollow. Victim. Yes, that was all Lysandra had ever been. A victim of circumstance, of cruelty, of a body that had betrayed her before she ever had a chance to live. She was so tired of being powerless, so tired of being something that happened to, rather than something that acted with purpose. "What will you do?" she asked. The king was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his words were measured and careful. "I will not complete the bond. Not yet. Not until I have exhausted every other option." Pain flared in Lysandra's chest, sharp and immediate, and she gasped. The bond did not like that decision, did not like the continued rejection, even if it could not be fully severed. Across the room, Aaron staggered slightly, his hand shooting out to brace against the wall, and she knew he felt it too. "You said there were old legends," he continued, his voice strained. "Stories about bonds like this. I will have the scholars search the archives. I will consult with every healer, every priestess, every witch who might have knowledge of such things. There must be a way to break this without killing us both. And if there is not..." He trailed off, unwilling or unable to finish the thought. "And if there is not?" Lysandra pressed, needing to hear him say it. "Then I will choose duty over desire," Aaron said flatly. "I will complete the bond to end the pain, but I will take a second mate, a fertile Omega who can give me the heirs I need. The pack laws allow it under exceptional circumstances, and this certainly qualifies. A second mate." The words hit Lysandra like a physical blow. She would be bound to him, forced to endure the intimacy of a completed bond, and then she would have to watch as he took another woman to his bed, as he gave that woman the children and the status and the love that should have been hers. She would be Luna Queen in name only, a broken placeholder warming a throne meant for someone else. "I see," Lysandra said, and her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. "That is practical. I did not say it was what I wanted." Aaron pushed away from the wall and crossed the room to her, moving with that predatory grace that marked him as alpha. He stopped at the edge of the bed, looking down at her with an expression that was almost regretful. "But I have responsibilities that transcend personal desires. The pack must come first. It always has. It always will." Lysandra understood duty. She understood sacrifice. She had spent her entire life sacrificing, giving up pieces of herself until there was almost nothing left, all to survive in a world that did not want her. But this felt different. This felt like being asked to carve out her own heart and hand it to someone else, still beating, and then smile as they crushed it. "How long?" she asked. "How long will you search for another solution?" "As long as it takes. Weeks, months, but not years." He paused, then added with brutal honesty, "The pack is already restless. My lack of an heir makes them nervous, makes them vulnerable to those who would challenge my rule. I cannot afford to appear weak, and I cannot afford to wait indefinitely. And what am I supposed to do while you search? Sit here and wait for you to decide my fate?" Something flickered across the king's face. Frustration, perhaps, or a flash of the same helpless anger Lysandra felt burning in her own chest. "You will heal. You will regain your strength, and you will learn what it means to be part of this pack again, even if your place in it is not what either of us would have chosen." "I am not part of this pack," Lysandra said, and the words came out harder than she intended. "I was cast out, declared cursed. They will not accept me, king's mate or not. They will accept what I tell them to accept," Aaron said, and there was steel in his voice, the absolute authority of a man who had never been denied. "You are under my protection now. Anyone who harms you or shows you disrespect will answer to me personally." It was not kindness, Lysandra knew. It was possession. The bond had made her his, whether he wanted it or not, and his wolf would not tolerate threats to what it considered its property. But even false protection was better than none, and she was too tired to argue. "Rest," the king said, stepping back from the bed. "I will have food brought to you, and tomorrow we will discuss this further. For now you are safe. That is all I can promise you." He left without waiting for a response, the door closing behind him with a finality that made Lysandra's chest tighten. Alone again, she lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened in the span of a single day. She had been rescued, brought to the royal palace, bound to the Alpha King by a bond that could not be broken, rejected but not released. And now she was trapped in a limbo where she was neither fully claimed nor fully free, condemned to wait while the king decided whether she was worth the trouble of keeping. The bond pulsed in her chest, a dull ache that reminded her of Aaron's presence somewhere in the keep, too far away to provide comfort, but close enough that she could sense him like a shadow at the edge of her awareness. She pressed her hand to her sternum, feeling the unnatural warmth there, and wondered if she would spend the rest of her life like this, incomplete, unwanted, bound to a man who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenient burden. Sleep did not come easily that night, and when it did, her dreams were dark and fragmented. She saw the priestess standing over her, the silver blade in her hand turning to ash. She saw the king on his throne with a golden-haired Omega at his side, their children playing at their feet while Lysandra stood in the shadows, unseen and forgotten. She saw blood, so much blood spreading across white snow, and she did not know if it was hers or someone else's. She woke to dawn light filtering through the high windows and the sound of someone moving around the room. Lysandra sat up quickly, her body protesting, and found a young woman setting a tray of food on the bedside table. The woman was perhaps 20, with auburn hair braided down her back, and the kind of effortless beauty that made Lysandra acutely aware of her own plainness. She wore the livery of a palace servant, simple but well-made, and she kept her eyes lowered respectfully as she worked. "Good morning, my lady," the woman said, her voice soft and carefully neutral. "The king instructed that you be brought breakfast. There is bread, honey, dried fruit, and tea. If you need anything else, you need only ask." "My lady." The title felt wrong, ill-fitting, like clothing meant for someone else. "Thank you," Lysandra said, because she did not know what else to say. The servant curtsied and turned to leave, but Lysandra called out before she could reach the door. "Wait, what is your name?" The woman turned back, surprise flickering across her face. "Mira, my lady. Mira, thank you for the food. And what are people saying? About me? About the king?" Mira's expression shuddered, caution replacing surprise. "I do not listen to gossip, my lady." "But you hear it," Lysandra pressed. "Please, I need to know what I am walking into." Mira hesitated, clearly torn between discretion and something else. Pity, perhaps, or a recognition of shared vulnerability. Finally, she said quietly, "They are saying the king has found his mate, that the bond was witnessed by his warriors. But they are also saying—" She trailed off, unwilling to continue. "That I am cursed," Lysandra finished for her. "That I am broken. That I am not fit to be Luna Queen." Mira's silence was answer enough. She curtsied again, more quickly this time, and left before Lysandra could ask anything else. Alone again, Lysandra looked at the tray of food and felt her stomach turn. She knew she needed to eat, that her body was weak and malnourished, but the thought of food made her nauseous. Still, she forced herself to pick at the bread and fruit, washing it down with tea that was too sweet, but at least hot. The day passed slowly, measured in the movement of sunlight across the floor and the distant sounds of the keep waking around her. Lysandra remained in the room, uncertain if she was allowed to leave, or if leaving would be seen as an insult or a challenge. No one came to see her except Mira, who brought lunch and then dinner, each time with the same careful neutrality. The king did not return, and Lysandra tried not to let that hurt, even though it did. She spent the time exploring the room, touching the tapestries and the furniture with cautious fingers, trying to understand this new world she had been thrust into. Everything was so rich, so fine, so utterly foreign to the life she had known. The bed alone was worth more than every possession she had ever owned combined. It felt obscene, wasteful, and yet she could not help but appreciate the warmth and comfort after years of sleeping on cold floors and thin straw mattresses. By the second day, Lysandra was restless enough to risk leaving the room. She wrapped herself in the cloak Cale had given her, which someone had cleaned and returned, and opened the door slowly, half expecting guards to stop her. But the hallway was empty, save for a single warrior standing at attention several yards away. He was young, perhaps mid-20s, with brown hair and a sword strapped to his back. When he saw her, he straightened, his expression shifting to something wary. "My lady," he said, bowing his head slightly. "Is there something you need?" "I wanted to walk," Lysandra said, feeling foolish. "To see something other than that room." The warrior's expression softened fractionally. "I am instructed to escort you if you wish to move about the keep." "For your protection," the king said. Protection or imprisonment? Lysandra was not sure there was a difference, but she nodded, stepping into the hallway, and the warrior fell into step behind her, maintaining a respectful distance. She walked slowly, taking in the architecture of the royal wing with growing awe. The hallways were wide and tall, the stone walls covered in intricate carvings that depicted the history of the Frostclaw Pack, great battles, legendary alphas, the founding of Winterfall Keep itself. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing light across everything, and the air smelled of smoke and pine and the faint metallic tang of magic. She passed other servants and warriors as she walked, and every one of them stopped to stare. Some bowed or curtsied, respecting her as the king's mate. Others simply watched with open curiosity or poorly concealed disdain. Lysandra kept her chin up, refusing to show fear even though her heart was hammering in her chest. She had survived the villagers' hatred. She would survive this too. She found herself drawn toward a large set of double doors at the end of one hallway, drawn by instinct or perhaps by the bond, which seemed to pull her in that direction. The warrior behind her cleared his throat nervously as she approached. "My lady, those are the king's private chambers. Perhaps we should—" But Lysandra was already reaching for the handle, some reckless part of her needing to see, needing to know. The door was unlocked and it swung open silently, revealing a room even larger than the one she had been given. It was austere compared to the rest of the keep, furnished with only the essentials: a massive bed, a desk covered in maps and documents, weapon racks along the walls, a fireplace that was currently cold and dark. The room smelled like him, like pine and smoke, and that wild something that made her wolf stir restlessly. "You should not be in here." Lysandra spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, and found the king standing in the doorway. He was dressed for training, his chest bare and gleaming with sweat, his hair tied back, and there was blood on his knuckles, his own or someone else's, she could not tell. He did not look angry, exactly, but there was a tension in his posture that suggested barely contained violence. "I'm sorry," Lysandra said quickly, backing away from the center of the room. "I did not mean to intrude. I was just—" "Looking for me?" Aaron finished, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The warrior had wisely made himself scarce. Or looking for answers? Both, maybe. Lysandra forced herself to meet his gaze, refusing to cower. "You have been gone for 2 days. I did not know if you had forgotten about me, or if you were simply avoiding the inconvenience I represent." Something flickered across the king's face. Guilt, perhaps, or irritation at being called out. "I have been searching for answers, as I said I would. Aldrich and the scholars have been combing through every text in the royal archives, looking for precedent or ritual that might help us. And have they found anything? Not yet." Aaron moved past her toward a basin of water near the window and began washing the blood from his hands. "But there are still centuries of records to review. These things take time. Time they might not have," Lysandra thought. She could already feel the incomplete bond wearing at her, a constant low-grade pain that sapped her energy and made it difficult to focus. If she was suffering this much after only 2 days, what would weeks or months do to her? "The pack is demanding to meet you," Aaron said without looking at her. "The elders, specifically. They want to verify the bond, to assess whether you are suitable to be Luna Queen. Lysandra's stomach dropped. When? 3 days from now. There will be a formal presentation in the throne room, followed by a private meeting with the Elder Council. He finally turned to look at her, his expression serious. You need to understand what you are walking into, Omega. The elders are powerful, and they are not easily swayed. They will question you, test you, try to find any weakness they can exploit to discredit you, or pressure me into rejecting you completely. Then they will have plenty to work with, Lysandra said bitterly. I am cursed, broken, cast out. They will have me removed within an hour. Not if I do not allow it. Aaron crossed the room to stand in front of her, and Lysandra had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You are my mate, whether I wanted it or not. That means something to this pack, even if it complicates everything else. The elders can question all they want, but they cannot force me to dissolve a fated bond. No one has that power except the moon herself. But they can make my life unbearable, Lysandra said quietly. They can isolate me, undermine me, turn the entire pack against me until I have no choice but to leave. Then you will have to be stronger than they expect. Aaron's voice was hard, uncompromising. You will have to prove that you are more than a cursed Omega. You will have to fight. Lysandra wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Fight? She had been fighting her entire life just to survive, scraping by on the edges of society, and it had earned her nothing but pain and loneliness. What made him think she had anything left to give? But even as the thought formed, she felt something stir inside her. Not her wolf, which was still weak and subdued, but something else. Something that whispered of the dreams she had been having, of the prophetic visions, and the strange pull toward this place. Something that suggested there was more to her story than even she understood. I will try, Lysandra said finally, and she meant it even though she did not believe it would be enough. But I cannot do this alone. If the elders are going to test me, I need to be prepared. I need to know what they will ask, what they expect, how to answer without condemning myself. Aaron studied her for a long moment, something almost like respect flickering in his gray eyes. I will have Kale work with you. He knows the politics of this court better than anyone, and he is loyal to me above all else. He will teach you what you need to survive the presentation. And after? Lysandra asked. After I face the elders and they make their judgment. What then? Then we continue as we have been, searching for answers, trying to find a way to make this work without destroying everything I have built. Aaron's expression softened slightly. Not quite kindness, but something close. I know this is not what you wanted, Omega, but we are bound now, for better or worse. We will find a way through this together, even if that way is not the one either of us would have chosen. Together. The word hung in the air between them, and Lysandra wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that she was not alone in this, that the cold, distant king standing before her might actually become an ally, if not a true mate. But belief required trust, and trust was something Lysandra had learned not to give freely. Still, she had little choice. She was trapped in the Obsidian Palace, bound to a man she barely knew, facing a pack that had already decided she was unworthy. If she was going to survive, she would need every advantage she could get, even if that advantage came from the very person who had rejected her. All right, Lysandra said quietly. Teach me, prepare me, and I will do my best not to embarrass you in front of your elders. Aaron's mouth quirked slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. Try not to die in front of them either. That would be inconvenient. It was a terrible joke, dark and inappropriate, but Lysandra found herself almost smiling despite everything. Maybe the Alpha King had a sense of humor buried beneath all that ice. Or maybe he was just as lost as she was, trying to find solid ground in a situation that defied every expectation and rule they had ever known. Either way, they were in this together now, and somehow, that thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Lysandra's story. Chapter 4. The 3 days before the presentation passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like warfare training than courtly instruction. Kale arrived at Lysandra's room the morning after her conversation with the king. his expression professional and his manner brisk. He wasted no time on pleasantries, launching immediately into what he called essential survival knowledge, with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign. "The elders will try to break you," he said bluntly, settling into a chair across from where Lysandra sat on the edge of her bed. "They will ask questions designed to humiliate you, to make you admit weakness or inferiority. They will reference your past, your curse, your lack of status. They will do everything in their power to make you appear unfit to stand beside the king." Lysandra wrapped her arms around herself, already feeling the weight of judgment she had not yet faced. "Why? If the bond cannot be broken, what does it matter whether they approve of me or not?" "Because perception is power in this court," Cale said, his ice-blue eyes sharp and assessing. "If the elders can convince the pack that you are weak, cursed, or dangerous, they can isolate you. They can make it impossible for you to function as Luna Queen even if you hold the title. They can turn every Omega, every warrior, every servant against you until you are a queen in name only, powerless and alone. So I am to be tested not on my worth, but on my ability to withstand their cruelty." "Exactly." Cale leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The pack respects strength above all else. Not just physical strength, though that matters, but strength of will. The ability to stand firm under pressure, to refuse to break even when every instinct screams at you to submit or flee. If you can show them that strength, even cursed and broken as you believe yourself to be, they will hesitate to move against you." Lysandra wanted to argue that she had no such strength, that she was exactly as weak as they believed her to be. But something in Cale's expression stopped her. A kind of fierce certainty that suggested he saw something in her she did not see in herself. "What will they ask me?" she said instead. "Everything. Your lineage, your history, your curse. They will want to know about your parents, your presentation, the priestess's declaration. They will ask why the moon would bind the Alpha King to an infertile Omega." Cale paused, then added more gently, "They will try to make you doubt yourself, make you believe you are a mistake or a punishment. You must not let them. How do I answer questions about my infertility? That is not something I can deny or explain away. The priestess declared it in front of the entire pack. It is a matter of record. You acknowledge it?" Cale said simply, "But you do not apologize for it. You state it as fact, without shame or self-pity, and then you turn the question back on them. Ask them how they dare question the moon's wisdom in creating a fated bond. Suggest that perhaps the curse was never real, or that the moon has plans they cannot understand. Make them uncertain. Make them wonder if they are the ones making a mistake by doubting you." It was clever, Lysandra had to admit. Manipulative in the way of politicians and courtiers, but clever. "And if they press? If they demand proof that I can bear children? Then you tell them proof will come in time, and that until then, they will have to trust in the bond and the moon's judgment." Cale's expression hardened. "And if they continue to push, you remind them that their king has claimed you, that any insult to you is an insult to him. Use his power as a shield when you must." Lysandra spent the rest of that day and the next drilling with Cale, practicing responses to increasingly hostile questions, learning to school her expression and control her body language. He taught her how to stand, shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward, in a way that conveyed confidence without arrogance. He taught her how to speak, clearly, firmly, without the apologetic softness that had become her default over years of trying to make herself small and inoffensive. He taught her how to breathe through pain and fear, how to center herself when panic threatened to overwhelm her. It was exhausting work, both mentally and physically. Lysandra had spent so long being invisible that the idea of standing before the entire pack and demanding to be seen felt impossible. But Cale was relentless, never accepting excuses or allowing her to retreat into the comfortable familiarity of self-doubt. "You are stronger than you think," he told her repeatedly, until the words began to sound almost like truth. "The king sees it. I see it. You survived things that would have broken others. You are still here, still fighting. That matters." On the evening before the presentation, Aaron came to her room. He brought with him a dress, rich and fine, the deep blue-black of a night sky with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything Lysandra had ever seen, let alone owned. And when he laid it across the bed, she could only stare. "For tomorrow," he said, his voice gruff, "you will be presented as my mate. You should look the part." Lysandra touched the fabric with trembling fingers, feeling the weight and quality of it. "This is too much. I cannot—" "You can," Aaron interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "And you will. The elders will judge you on everything, including your appearance. I will not give them the satisfaction of seeing my mate dressed in rags." His mate. He said it so easily now, as though he had accepted the bond even if he had not completed it. Lysandra looked up at him, searching his face for some hint of what he was thinking, but his expression was as unreadable as ever. "Kale says you have been working hard," Aaron continued, moving to the window and staring out at the darkening sky. "He believes you will do well tomorrow. Kale is optimistic. Kale is never optimistic. He is a realist, and if he believes in you, then you should believe in yourself." The king turned to face her, and there was something in his eyes that might have been concern. "This will not be easy, Lysandra. The elders will be brutal, but you are not facing them alone. I will be there. Kale will be there. And whatever happens, you are under my protection. Remember that." Lysandra wanted to ask him why he cared, why he was going to such lengths to prepare her when he had already rejected the bond. But she knew the answer. It was not about her as a person. It was about his pride, his authority, his refusal to appear weak before his elders. She was a symbol now, a piece in a larger game, and he was ensuring that piece performed its function adequately. "I will try not to disappoint you," she said quietly. Aaron studied her for a long moment, then nodded once and left without another word. Alone again, Lysandra lay down on the bed beside the beautiful dress and stared at the ceiling, trying to calm her racing heart. Tomorrow would determine everything. Whether she had a place in this pack, whether she could survive as the king's rejected mate, whether the moon had made a terrible mistake in binding her to a man who would never truly want her. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams again. But this time they were different, clearer, more urgent. She dreamed of the throne room, packed with wolves whose eyes glowed in the darkness. She dreamed of standing before them, small and fragile, while they circled like predators scenting blood. She dreamed of the priestess, Morwenna, stepping forward with that terrible silver blade, pressing it not to Lysandra's abdomen but to her throat. And she dreamed of light, brilliant, blinding light, bursting from her chest and driving back the darkness, scattering the wolves, leaving only her and the king standing in an empty room. She woke gasping, her hand pressed to her sternum where the bond pulsed with unusual warmth. The dream clung to her like cobwebs, refusing to fade, and she had the unsettling sense that it had not been just a dream, but a vision, a warning, or perhaps a promise. Morning came too quickly. Mira arrived early to help her prepare, bringing with her 2 other servants and a hairdresser who set to work on Lysandra with professional efficiency. They bathed her in water scented with lavender and rose, washed her hair until it shone, and then dressed her in the midnight dress that fit as though it had been made for her specifically. The hairdresser braided her hair in an intricate pattern that incorporated silver thread, creating the illusion of starlight woven through dark strands. They painted her face with subtle cosmetics that enhanced her features without making her look like someone else. And when they finally stepped back to let her see herself in the mirror, Lysandra barely recognized her reflection. She looked like a queen. Or, at least, she looked like someone who could become one. The dress transformed her plain features into something almost regal, the silver embroidery drawing the eye and creating an impression of otherworldly beauty. But it was her eyes that held her attention. They looked different somehow, larger, more intense, as though the past days of pain and fear and determination had burned away some of the softness and left something harder behind. "You look beautiful, my lady," Mira said quietly, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "I look like a lie," Lysandra said, but without real bitterness, like someone pretending to be something they are not. "Perhaps, Mira said. Or perhaps you look like who you were always meant to be, and the rest of us simply could not see it. There was no time to respond because Kale arrived to escort her to the throne room. He wore his formal armor, polished to a mirror shine, and his expression was grave. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," Lysandra said honestly, "but I will go anyway." He smiled at that, a quick flash of approval. "Good. Remember everything we practiced. Stand tall, speak clearly, do not apologize, and trust that the king will not let them destroy you." They walked through the keep together, Lysandra's heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The hallways were empty of servants and warriors, everyone having already gathered in the throne room for the presentation. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their footsteps on stone and Lysandra's too quick breathing. The doors to the throne room were massive, carved from black oak and banded with iron, and they stood open like the mouth of some great beast waiting to swallow her whole. Lysandra paused at the threshold, her courage failing for a moment, and Kale placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can do this," he said quietly. "I have seen wolves twice your size break under less pressure, but you are still here, still standing. That strength will carry you through." Lysandra took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped through the doors. The throne room was enormous, its ceiling vaulted so high it disappeared into shadow, despite the hundreds of torches that lined the walls. The floor was polished black stone that reflected the firelight like dark water, and at the far end of the room, elevated on a dais of 3 steps, sat the throne. It was carved from a single piece of obsidian, its back formed into the shape of a howling wolf, and seated upon it was Aaron Blackmore, Alpha King of the Frostclaw Pack. He wore formal armor of black leather and steel, his shoulders draped with a cloak of wolf fur so dark it seemed to absorb light. A crown of twisted silver sat on his brow, simple but unmistakably regal, and his expression was cold and distant as a winter storm. He looked every inch the powerful Alpha, the warrior king who had united the northern packs through strength and will, and Lysandra felt the vast distance between them like a physical chasm. But it was not the king who made her steps falter. It was the crowd. The throne room was packed with wolves, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, all standing in organized ranks according to their status. Warriors near the front, their armor gleaming. Omegas and lower-ranked betas behind them, their eyes bright with curiosity or hostility. And directly before the throne, in a semicircle that faced the entrance, stood the Elder Council. There were 12 of them, 6 men and 6 women, all advanced in years but radiating the kind of power that came from decades of accumulated authority. They wore robes of deep gray trimmed with silver, and each carried a staff carved with the symbols of their particular domain: war, healing, law, magic, trade, and tradition. At the center of the group stood the High Priestess, Morwenna, her white hair unbound and flowing past her shoulders, her eyes black as pitch and twice as cold. Every eye in the room turned to Lysandra as she entered, and the weight of their collective judgment nearly drove her to her knees. She felt naked despite the beautiful dress, exposed and vulnerable, and it took every ounce of will she possessed to keep walking forward with her head high and her steps even. Kale walked beside her until they reached the center of the room, and then he bowed and stepped back, leaving her alone before the throne and the elders. The silence was absolute, oppressive, and Lysandra could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Lysandra Vale," Aaron's voice rang out, formal and emotionless. "You stand before the Frostclaw Pack as my acknowledged mate, bound to me by the will of the moon. The Elder Council has requested this presentation to verify the bond and to assess your fitness to serve as Luna Queen. Do you accept their authority to make this judgment?" It was a trap, Lysandra realized. If she said yes, she gave them power over her. If she said no, she insulted the entire council and appeared arrogant or defiant. Kale had warned her about questions like this, the ones with no good answer. "I accept the council's wisdom," Lysandra said carefully, her voice carrying across the silent room. "But I recognize that only the moon has authority over bonds she herself creates. I am here to answer your questions truthfully, not to submit to judgment on matters beyond mortal authority." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. On the throne, Aaron's expression did not change, but Lysandra thought she saw the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes. The elders, however, looked less pleased. Morwenna stepped forward, her staff striking the stone floor with a sound like a gavel. "Bold words for a cursed Omega," the priestess said, her voice like ice scraping over stone. "You stand before us wearing the trappings of royalty, but we remember what you are. We remember the ritual. We remember the blade that rejected you, that marked you as barren and broken. How dare you speak of the moon's will when the moon herself declared you unworthy?" The attack was immediate and brutal, designed to shake Lysandra's composure before she had even fully settled. She felt the familiar shame rising, the old instinct to curl in on herself and accept the condemnation. But she remembered Kael's training, remembered the king's warning, and most of all, she remembered the dream, the light bursting from her chest, driving back the darkness. "The moon's will is not always clear at the moment of revelation," Lysandra said, keeping her voice steady. "I was declared cursed at 13 years old, during a ritual designed to assess fertility. But I stand here now, bound by a fated bond to the Alpha King. A bond so powerful it cannot be broken even by rejection." Perhaps the priestess's interpretation of the moon's will was incomplete. Or perhaps the moon has always had a different plan, one that required me to suffer first before rising to meet my true purpose. Gasps echoed through the crowd. No one questioned the priestess's authority, certainly not to her face. But Lysandra was done being silent, done accepting judgment from those who had never tried to understand. Morwenna's face twisted with fury. "You blaspheme. You suggest that I, who have served the moon for 40 years, failed to read her signs correctly? I suggest that the moon is not bound by mortal understanding," Lysandra said, "and that a bond which refuses to break despite the king's rejection is sign enough that something greater is at work here. The bond may be real," another elder cut in, an older man with a beard that reached his chest. "But that does not make you fit to rule. You have no training, no lineage, no accomplishments. You are a seamstress from the borderlands, a nobody who was cast out for good reason. What can you possibly offer this pack as Luna Queen?" "I offer the same thing any queen offers," Lysandra said. "Loyalty, strength, the willingness to serve the pack's interests above my own. I may not have been born to power, but I have survived things that would have killed softer wolves. I have lived in poverty and abuse and isolation, and I am still standing. That is not nothing." "It is not enough," Morwenna hissed. "The pack needs heirs. The bloodline must continue. You admitted yourself that you are barren. What use is a Luna Queen who cannot give the king children?" This was the question Lysandra had been dreading, the one she had no good answer for. She opened her mouth to respond, to repeat the practiced deflection Kael had taught her, but before she could speak, something strange happened. Pain lanced through her abdomen, sharp and sudden, and Lysandra gasped, doubling over slightly. It was not the bone-deep ache of the incomplete bond, but something else, something new and alarming. Heat bloomed in her lower belly, spreading outward in waves, and with it came a sensation she had never felt before, a kind of awakening, as though something long dormant was stirring to life inside her. The room spun. Lysandra's vision blurred, and she heard Aaron's voice from very far away, sharp with concern. "Lysandra!" And then the pain peaked, and something broke inside her. Not physically, but magically. It felt like chains snapping, like a door long sealed suddenly thrown open, and power flooded through her body with such intensity she thought she might shatter from it. Light burst from her skin, visible even in the torchlit room, a brilliant silver-blue radiance that made everyone in the throne room stumble back, shielding their eyes. Through the light, through the pain and the impossible sensation of her body changing, Lysandra heard a voice. It was not external, but internal, resonating in her bones and her blood and the very core of her being. "The seal is broken. You are whole. You have always been whole." The light faded as suddenly as it had come, leaving Lysandra swaying on her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The throne room was silent, everyone staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to fear to wonder. And in her abdomen, where the curse had supposedly closed her womb, Lysandra felt warmth and life and the unmistakable sensation of something new. She was not barren. She had never been barren. The priestess's ritual had not revealed a curse, but had created one, sealing her fertility away with magic disguised as prophecy. And now, in the moment of her greatest need, the seal had broken. Morwenna stared at her with dawning horror, her face pale. "Impossible," she whispered. "The ritual was... I did not." "You sealed her," Aaron said, and his voice was terrible in its coldness. He had risen from the throne and was descending the steps with lethal grace, his eyes burning gold with barely contained fury. "You sealed an Omega child's fertility and declared it the moon's will. Why?" The priestess stumbled back, her confidence crumbling. "I did what was necessary. She was... The prophecy said..." "What prophecy?" The king's voice cracked like a whip, and Morwenna flinched. "A primordial Omega," another elder said, and his voice shook. "Born once every 1,000 years. A wolf whose fertility is so potent it can produce multiple children in a single pregnancy, whose power rivals that of the strongest alpha. The old texts say such Omegas must be controlled, or they will upset the balance of power, threaten the established order." "So you sealed her," Aaron said, and there was death in his voice. "You took a child who had done nothing wrong, and you crippled her, condemned her to a life of suffering and isolation, because you feared what she might become." Lysandra could barely process what she was hearing. Primordial Omega. The words echoed in her mind, connecting to the dreams, the visions, the strange pull she had always felt toward Winterfall Keep. She was not cursed. She had never been cursed. She had been feared, and fear had led the elders to destroy her before she could become a threat. "I did what was best for the pack," Morwenna said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You defied the moon's will," Aaron said, stopping mere feet from the priestess. "You took it upon yourself to decide who was worthy and who was not, and in doing so, you caused immeasurable suffering to an innocent. You will answer for this." He turned to the assembled pack, his voice rising to carry to every corner of the vast room. "Lysandra Vale is my true mate, bound to me by a fated bond that even my rejection could not sever. The seal that claimed to prove her infertile was a lie, a manipulation by those who feared her power. She stands before you now as what she has always been, a primordial Omega, blessed by the moon, and my Luna Queen." The pack erupted into chaos, shouts of disbelief, cries of support, arguments breaking out among the assembled wolves. But Aaron's voice cut through it all, absolute and commanding. "Any who question her place beside me question my authority. Any who seek to harm her will face my wrath personally. She is mine, and I am hers, and that is the end of all discussion." He moved to Lysandra then, and she saw something in his face she had never seen before. Not just concern or duty, but genuine emotion, regret, guilt, and beneath it all, the beginning of something that might, someday, become more. "I rejected you," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "I doubted the moon's wisdom. I let fear and duty blind me to what was right in front of me. I am sorry." Lysandra looked up at him, this powerful king who had just claimed her before his entire pack, and felt something shift in her chest. The bond, which had been aching and incomplete, suddenly flared to life with renewed intensity. Not painful now, but warm. Right. As though it had been waiting for this moment, for both of them to finally accept what they were to each other. "I forgive you," she said, and meant it. Aaron pulled her close, his arms coming around her in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Then let me do this properly," he murmured, and raised his voice again to address the pack. "I, Aaron Blackmore, Alpha King of the Frostclaw Pack, claim Lysandra Vale as my true mate and Luna Queen. I revoke my rejection and accept the bond the moon has given us." The bond snapped into place completely, and this time there was no pain. Only warmth and light and a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to Lysandra's eyes. She felt Aaron's presence flood through her, solid and strong and fierce, and she knew he felt hers in return. The resilience, the quiet strength, the stubborn refusal to break no matter how hard the world tried. They were whole. Finally. Irrevocably whole. The pack's resistance crumbled in the face of the king's declaration and the visible proof of Lysandra's power. The elders who had conspired to seal her were stripped of their positions and exiled, Morwenna among them. New elders were chosen, wolves who accepted Lysandra not as a threat, but as the blessing she had always been meant to be. Weeks passed, and Lysandra settled into her role as Luna Queen with growing confidence. The pack slowly accepted her, and those who did not learn to keep their objections silent. She and Aaron grew closer each day, the bond deepening into something more than mere magical compulsion. They learned to trust each other, to lean on each other, and eventually, to love. 3 months after the presentation, Lysandra woke to a familiar sensation, the warmth in her abdomen, the flutter of new life. She placed her hand over her stomach and knew, with absolute certainty, that she was pregnant, with twins. 2 strong heartbeats pulsing in time with her own, 2 souls that would change the pack forever. When she told Aaron, he wept. The fearsome Alpha King, who had never shown weakness, broke down with relief and joy and gratitude. He held her close and whispered promises against her hair, that he would protect her, that he would cherish her, that he would spend the rest of his life making up for the pain she had endured. The twins were born beneath the northern lights, their arrival heralded by omens and portents that confirmed what everyone already knew. They were special, blessed, the children of a primordial Omega and an Alpha King, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's strength, a son with his father's power and his mother's compassion. Lysandra stood in the throne room 1 year after her presentation, the twins in her arms, and looked out at the pack that had once rejected her. She was no longer the broken Omega from the borderlands, no longer the cursed girl who had been thrown away. She was Luna Queen, powerful and beloved, a living testament to the fact that the moon's plans were always greater than mortal understanding. She had been rejected, broken, lost, and through it all, she had survived. She had risen, and she had transformed her pain into a legacy that would reshape the werewolf realm forever. The moon had always known, and now, finally, so did everyone else.